Hello, and a very warm welcome to Past Treasures. What if the story of us ... the story of human civilization? What if the neat, tidy timeline you learned in school, the one that begins roughly 6,000 years ago with the first tentative scratches of writing in Mesopotamia, isn't the beginning at all? What if it's just the final chapter? Or perhaps merely the epilogue of a much older, stranger, and far more epic narrative? Tonight, wherever you are in the world, perhaps you're settling in with a warm drink, or listening to this on a late-night drive, I invite you to join me in considering a disturbing possibility. What if, long before our recorded history even began, this planet was ruled by just 8 kings? And what if their collective reign did not last for a few centuries, but for 241,200 years? It is a story written down in cold, hard, factual terms, inscribed on one of the most enigmatic and challenging ancient texts ever unearthed. This document names each of these rulers, their capital cities, and the precise, impossible lengths of their reigns. We are not speaking of men who ruled for 20 or 50 years. We are speaking of individuals who are recorded as holding the throne for 28,000 years, 36,000 years, even 43,000 years at a time. These kings, according to this record, would have watched empires rise and fall under their singular command. They would have moved their centers of power across a prehistoric world that we can barely imagine, a world that existed before the Great Flood. The cataclysm that we so often think of as a story of creation might not have been the beginning, but the end of their world and the violent interruption of their reign. Everything we believe about the dawn of civilization is built on a foundation of gradual human progress. We imagine small bands of hunter-gatherers, slowly ... painstakingly ... learning to plant crops, settling in villages, and over millennia, building the first cities. But this artifact tells a different story. It suggests our history is not only vastly older than we think, but that it started in a way we have never dared to consider. The evidence for this staggering claim isn't hidden in some secret vault, accessible only to a privileged few. It has been sitting in a museum collection for over a century. It is inscribed on a small, rather unassuming block of baked clay, an object no larger than a modern paperback book. And yet, this single artifact, if we take it at its word, systematically dismantles our entire, cherished understanding of the human past. It is called the Weld-Blundell Prism, and the document it contains is known to history as the Sumerian King List. It states, with the dry, bureaucratic precision of an accountant, that before a catastrophic global flood, just 8 kings ruled over humanity for a staggering 241,200 years. If you find yourself drawn to these kinds of deep historical mysteries, the ones that linger at the very edge of our understanding, perhaps you'd consider hitting that like button or subscribing to join our journey into these past treasures. I would genuinely love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. As always with our explorations here, the visuals on your screen are intended to add context and atmosphere, but they are not essential. This is a story designed to be listened to, so please get comfortable. Prepare your mind for a journey back, not just to the dawn of our history, but to the world that came before. Let us begin. Our story must rewind to 1922. Imagine the scene. In the sun-scorched, wind-swept plains of modern-day Iraq, a British archaeological expedition is carefully at work. Led by Herbert Weld-Blundell, the team is meticulously excavating the ancient ruins of the Sumerian city of Larsa. They are sifting through the rubble of a civilization that has been dead for 4,000 years, searching for fragments of its life pottery shards, seals, broken tablets. Not a golden mask, not a royal jewel, but something far more valuable to a historian. It is a 4-sided prism of baked clay, standing about 8 inches tall, and it is covered, from top to bottom, in lines of tightly packed cuneiform, the distinctive wedge-shaped script of the ancient Sumerians. This artifact, which would come to be named after its discoverer, was transported back to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. As scholars began the painstaking work of translation, they braced themselves for the familiar. They expected, perhaps, another record of grain harvests, a ledger of trade deals, or maybe a collection of hymns to a forgotten god. These are the common, everyday documents that build our picture of the ancient world. Instead, they found something that baffled them, something that still baffles us today. They found a meticulously organized, chronologically precise list. It was a list of rulers, their capital cities, and the specific lengths of their reigns. The style of the writing was not poetic. It was not mythological in its tone. It was written with the dry, dispassionate precision of a court scribe, a royal archivist, or a government accountant. It reads like a ledger, a factual record of history, as it was known to the person who inscribed it around 2100 BCE. The list begins with one of the most world-altering statements ever found in archaeology. A simple declarative sentence that sets the stage for everything that follows. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Let that sink in for a moment. Kingship, the very concept of royal rule, was not, according to the Sumerians, a human invention born of necessity. It was a gift, an institution delivered to earth from an external source. The scribe then continues, moving immediately to the first king of this first city, Eridu. His name, the list states, was Alulim. The list goes on. The list continues in this fashion, meticulously naming 8 kings who ruled from 5 different capital cities in the world before the flood. Each reign lasts for tens of thousands of years. The scribe then, like a good accountant, tallies the total. 8 kings, 5 cities. Their reigns summing to 241,200 years. It is interrupted by a single stark sentence that divides all of history into before and after. Then the flood swept over. To the modern mind, these numbers are, of course, absurd. They are self-evidently fantastic. No human being, as we understand biology, can live for 28,000 years, let alone actively rule a kingdom for that entire duration. The immediate, and indeed, the continuing reaction from mainstream history and archaeology was to dismiss this entire antediluvian, or pre-flood, section as pure fantasy. It was, they concluded, a creation myth, a collection of symbolic tales, no different from the Greek stories of Titans or the Norse tales of giants. These early rulers were labeled as mythological figures, and their reigns were interpreted as symbolic, perhaps representing the perceived ancientness of a particular city or dynasty. It was a neat, tidy explanation. It allowed history to begin safely after the flood. With the rise of the first verifiable dynasties around 3000 BCE, it kept our comfortable timeline intact. Because after that line, then the flood swept over, the list picks right back up. It begins again, stating that after the flood, kingship once more descended from heaven, this time to the city of Kish. It names new kings and new cities. But now, something has profoundly changed. The reigns are dramatically shorter. We see kings who rule for 900 years, 600 years, a few hundred years, then just over a century, then a few decades. Suddenly, as the list marches forward in time, the numbers become plausible. They become recognizably human. And that is when the real bombshell drops. The post-flood section of the Sumerian King List names rulers who we know, from other archaeological discoveries and independent texts, were real historical figures. Most famously, the list names Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. It lists him as a real king who ruled for 126 years. For centuries, Gilgamesh too was thought to be a purely mythological character, the hero of the world's first great work of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. But in the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists unearthed the very city of Uruk, and even found inscriptions confirming the existence of other kings named in his dynasty. They found his city walls, the very walls the epic claims he built. Gilgamesh, it turns out, was almost certainly a real person. This creates an inescapable, profound paradox. If the later part of the Sumerian King List is accepted as a genuine, reliable historical record, which it largely is, how can we so confidently, so arrogantly, dismiss the first part? The very same scribe, using the exact same dispassionate, matter-of-fact tone, wrote down both. The document itself makes no distinction. It doesn't say, "Here is the mythology, and now here is the real history." It presents them all as one single, continuous, unbroken line of succession, interrupted only by one great world-ending cataclysm. To ignore the first half of the list is to tear a 4,000-year-old document in two, and arbitrarily claim that only the piece we like, the piece that fits our model, is authentic. The prism doesn't allow for that. It forces us to confront the entire text as a single, unified statement. And this forces us to ask a terrifying, thrilling question. A memory of a history so old and so strange that it has become incomprehensible to us. What if the impossible numbers are not fantasies, but facts that we simply lack the context to understand? The mystery deepens, moving from the realm of history to the realm of mathematics when you look closer at the numbers themselves. Those impossibly long reigns, 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years, are not the random, wildly exaggerated figures a storyteller might pull from thin air. A storyteller might say, "He ruled for 1,000,000 years," or "His reign was as long as the stars." These numbers are not poetic. They are precise, and they follow a very clear, deliberate pattern. This pattern is based on the Sumerian sexagesimal system, their base 60 method of mathematics. It is the very same system we have inherited and still use to this day to measure our time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and our geometry, 360 degrees in a circle. For the Sumerians, the number 60 was the divine building block of the cosmos. Their highest known unit of time, a sort of cosmic cycle, was called a sar. A single sar represented 3,600 years. Now, let us look at those impossible reigns again, but this time, let's look at them through a Sumerian mathematical lens. The first king, Alulim, ruled for 28,800 years. What is 28,800 divided by 3,600? It is exactly 8. His reign was recorded as 8 SARs. The second king, Alalgar, ruled for 36,000 years. 36,000 divided by 3,600 is exactly 10. His reign was 10 SARs. The third king, Enmannuana, ruled for 43,200 years. 43,200 divided by 3,600 is exactly 12. His reign was 12 SARs. This is not the work of a fantasist. This is the work of a calculator, a scribe, an astronomer. This is a calculated, deliberate, ordered system. The scribes who compiled this list were recording something they believed to be structured, precise, and mathematically significant. The numbers themselves were meant to convey a kind of cosmic harmony and order. This meticulous pattern leads us to two mind-bending possibilities. The first, and more conservative, possibility is that the numbers are symbolic, but in a much more sophisticated way than we first assumed. Perhaps kingship itself was what lasted for 8 SARs in Eridu, and Alulim was simply the name given to that era. Perhaps the numbers represent symbolic cycles of power, or eras of influence, or complex astronomical calculations related to the precession of the equinoxes. This is an elegant theory, but it has one major flaw. Why present these symbolic eras as the reigns of specific named individuals? Why list them one after the other in a document that, in its second half, clearly records actual human kings? The second possibility is far more radical. It is the one that historians tend to avoid, because its implications are simply too vast. What if the numbers are real? What if Ululim truly did preside over Eridu for 28,800 years, because Ululim was not human? The list itself gives us the most potent clue in its very first, world-changing line. Kingship descended from heaven. For the Sumerians, the right to rule was not a human invention. It was not something a strong warlord or a clever priest simply seized for himself. It was an institution, a technology, a package of knowledge and power that was delivered to Earth from an outside, non-human source. This has led some researchers, often working at the very fringes of accepted academia, to a controversial, almost unthinkable conclusion that the Sumerian King List is a literal, factual record of a time when Earth was governed by non-human entities, beings whose biology, or perhaps whose technology, allowed for lifespans that make a complete mockery of our own. And looming in the background of this entire theory, casting a shadow over all of Sumerian mythology, is a single powerful name, the Anunnaki. This term, which appears throughout Sumerian texts, is most often translated as those who from heaven to earth came. The Weld-Blundell prism is not a standalone fantasy. It is not one scribe's strange dream. Archaeologists have, to date, found at least 16 other fragments of the King List, scattered across the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia in cities like Nippur, Kish, and Sippar. All of them, in one form or another, tell the same core story. This was not a fringe belief. This was the foundational, accepted, state-sanctioned history for the people who invented civilization. They believed, without question, that their world was born from an age of godlike kings, an age that ended in a world-destroying flood, and that their own modern kings were merely the inheritors of a mandate that had its origins not on Earth, but in the stars. This small clay prism, therefore, doesn't just ask us to reconsider the timeline of human history. It forces us to question the very nature of our past and the identity of those who first sat on a throne on planet Earth. It presents a history divided into two distinct, dramatic acts, the world before the water and the world after. Our journey tonight must begin in that lost, drowned world. It begins as we try to understand the meaning behind that first fateful descent, that moment when kingship, and perhaps civilization itself, arrived from the heavens. That single line, kingship descended from heaven, is more than just an ancient, poetic phrase. If we take it seriously, it represents a complete re-engineering of the entire story of human civilization. Our modern understanding, built over centuries of archaeology and anthropology, tells a story of gradual, bottom-up evolution. We picture small nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers, slowly, over thousands upon thousands of years, settling down. They learn to domesticate plants and animals. This agricultural revolution allows them to form permanent villages. These villages, over more thousands of years, grow into towns, and eventually, these towns grow into the first cities. In this model, government and kingship are a natural human invention. They are a necessary tool created by humans to manage the new, complex problems that arise from living together in large numbers. Problems like large-scale irrigation, communal food storage, trade disputes, and defense against rivals. Kingship, in this view, was a human solution to human problems. The Sumerian King List throws this entire, comfortable model into the fire. It presents a radical alternative, a top-down origin. It claims that civilization didn't painstakingly invent kingship as its final step. Instead, the institution of kingship arrived first, fully formed, as a complete package delivered from an external source. Civilization, then, according to this model, simply crystallized around this pre-existing divine structure. It suggests that early human society didn't develop its own operating system through millennia of trial and error. An operating system was installed. This concept fundamentally changes the very nature of those first rulers. They weren't just the strongest warlords or the cleverest priests who managed to seize power from their peers. They were appointees. They were, perhaps, the first CEOs of a cosmic franchise, a new project established on Earth. Their authority, crucially, did not come from the consent of the governed or the might of their armies. This is the very essence of what we now call the divine right of kings. We tend to think of this as a much later invention, a cynical justification for power used by European monarchs in the Middle Ages. But the Sumerians are telling us it was there from the absolute, literal beginning. The very first king who ever ruled did so, not because he conquered his neighbors, but because he was chosen by the gods. The stage for this monumental, history-altering event, the list tells us, was a city called Eridu. For the Sumerians, Eridu wasn't just a city. It was the first city, the primordial home, the Eden of their civilization. And archaeological digs have confirmed that Eridu is indeed one of the oldest settlements ever discovered in Mesopotamia. With its deepest foundations dating back to around 5400 BCE. But what archaeologists found there is strange. The city seems to appear with a surprising level of sophistication. Deep below the desert sands, in the most ancient layers of the ruin, they uncovered the remains of a small, simple shrine. But as they dug upwards, they found that this shrine was obsessively rebuilt, again and again and again, over centuries. Each new temple was larger and more elaborate than the last, but it was always built directly on top of the foundations of the old one. It's as if the inhabitants, for thousands of years, were trying to maintain a sacred physical connection to that exact spot on the earth. It was a point of contact, a hot spot that linked their world to another. Sumerian mythology tells us exactly why this spot was so important. Eridu was the sacred home of Enki, the god of wisdom, knowledge, magic, creation, and sweet waters. Enki was often depicted as a friend to humanity, the great scientist, engineer, and teacher among the gods. If kingship, with all its associated laws, sciences, and social structures, was a gift to be delivered to Earth, Enki's city of Eridu would be the logical delivery point. This brings us to the most provocative, and for many, the most compelling interpretation of descended from heaven. What if the Sumerians meant it literally? What if the Anunnaki, the gods who they said came from the sky, were not mythological figures, but physical, biological beings? Beings with an advanced technology and a profound ancient understanding of social engineering. In this scenario, the establishment of kingship in Eridu was a deliberate act of intervention. Perhaps they observed early humans living in chaotic, scattered, hunter-gatherer tribes and decided to impose order to accelerate our development. They didn't just teach us how to build temples. They taught us how to build a society. They delivered the blueprints for law, for science, for mathematics, for writing, and for government. The first kings then, like Ululim, were the local managers of this grand project. Perhaps they were even hybrids, part Anunnaki and part human, serving as the perfect intermediaries between the gods and the burgeoning human population. This hypothesis, while radical, offers a startlingly neat explanation for one of archaeology's greatest and most enduring puzzles, the Sumerian problem. The problem, in simple terms, is this. Civilization seems to explode out of nowhere in southern Mesopotamia. Complex writing, advanced mathematics, including the base 60 system we still use, astonishingly accurate astronomical knowledge, sophisticated legal codes, and monumental architecture all appear in a remarkably short period, with very few primitive antecedents. It's as if a switch was flipped, and humanity went from simple village life to complex, urban civilization almost overnight. The conventional theory of slow, gradual development struggles to explain this sudden, brilliant leap. But a theory of external intervention of knowledge, being given rather than learned, explains it perfectly. This idea of a heavenly mandate for rulers, this divine right, is not unique to Sumer. It is a foundational belief for nearly every single great ancient civilization. It is a strange, persistent echo that rings across cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years. Have you ever wondered why that is? In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a king. He was a living god, the earthly incarnation of the god Horus and the son of Ra. His authority was absolute because it was divine. In imperial China, emperors ruled by the mandate of heaven, Tianming. Heaven, a conscious cosmic force, would grant a just and wise ruler the right to lead, and would withdraw that mandate from a corrupt or foolish one, leading to the downfall of a dynasty. In the biblical tradition, it is God who anoints kings. Figures like Saul and David do not seize power. They are chosen and anointed by a prophet, bestowing upon them the divine authority to rule God's chosen people. Across the globe, from the Inca emperors who claimed direct descent from the sun god Inti, to the Japanese emperors who traced their lineage unbroken to the sun goddess Amaterasu, the story is fundamentally the same. True authority flows from the sky, not from the earth. Could this universal myth be a shared, distorted, collective memory? A memory of a single real event, back in the mists of antediluvian time? A memory of a moment when humanity's path was deliberately and directly altered by a non-human intelligence. The Sumerian King List doesn't just suggest this. It presents it as the opening, non-negotiable fact of its historical record. It states plainly that our story as a civilized species did not begin with a human idea. It began with a divine directive. It means that the very structures that govern our lives to this day, laws, hierarchies, taxes, and the concentration of power in the hands of a few, may not be human inventions at all. We are left facing a choice between two realities, both of which are world-changing. Either kingship descended from heaven is the most successful and enduring piece of political propaganda ever invented, a myth created by the first human rulers to legitimize their power, or it is the literal truth, a 4,000-year-old memory of the moment our world was forever changed by contact. The prism gives us our first clue by naming the very first man or being to hold this divine mandate in the sacred city of Eridu. In the sacred primordial city of Eridu, the Sumerian King List tells us that the celestial gift of kingship was bestowed upon its very first recipient. With this single act, the great clock of civilization officially begins to tick. The king's name was Alulim. The list is starkly, almost frustratingly simple in its description. It offers no tales of his coronation. There are no epic poems here about his great battles, no hymns praising his profound wisdom. The scribe states only his name, his capital city, and a number that defies all human experience. Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Let us pause and try, for a moment, to truly comprehend this. This is not just a long reign. This single reign is a span of time so vast, it contains all of recorded human history, from the building of the pyramids to the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope 3 times over. To our modern sensibilities, this number is the ultimate, final proof that Alulim is a myth. It is the very definition of an impossibility. To them, the number itself was the proof of his legitimacy. As we saw, 28,800 is not a random number. It is precisely 8 SARS8 perfect cycles of 3,600 years. It was a perfect, cosmically significant number, signaling a reign that was in complete harmony with the divine order of the heavens. To even try and understand this, we must detach from our own sense of time, from our own fleeting lifespans. Imagine a ruler who was not a fragile man, but a constant, unyielding, permanent presence. A being who watched as dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of generations of his mortal subjects were born, lived their short lives, and died. For the people of Eridu, Alulim would not have been a man. He would have been a geological feature. He would have been as permanent as the river Euphrates, as eternal and unchanging as the sun. This absolute, unimaginable stability would have cemented the idea of kingship as a divine, unshakable institution. How could anyone possibly question a system whose leader had presided over their civilization since a time beyond memory? His very existence was the ultimate proof that the kingship he held was not of this world. This is where the Anunnaki theory provides a compelling, if deeply unsettling, framework. If Alulim was not a human king, but an Anunnaki governor, or perhaps a genetically modified human-Anunnaki hybrid engineered for a vastly extended lifespan? If that were the case, the 28,800-year reign suddenly shifts. It changes from a mythological impossibility to a simple factual statement from a non-human perspective. He was the first administrator of Project Earth, and his term lasted for 8 cosmic cycles. After Alulim's epic reign finally concluded, the King List tells us that kingship remained in Eridu. The throne passed to a second ruler, Alalgar. His reign was even longer, 36,000 years. A perfect 10 SARs. The pattern continues. Alalgar, like Alulim, is a ghost in the historical record. No stories of his deeds survive. No monuments bear his name. His reign reinforces this theme of cosmic order and absolute stability. He wasn't remembered for changing the world, but for maintaining it. For 36 millennia, he was the anchor. He was the shepherd who kept the flock. Together, these first 2 kings ruled from the single city of Eridu for a combined 64,800 years. To put that number in perspective, the last great ice age, which covered much of the earth in glaciers, only ended about 11,700 years ago. According to this ancient document, the city of Eridu was a stable, continuously governed political entity for a period of time more than 5 times longer than our entire modern epoch. This forces us to look again at Eridu. Was it just a collection of mud brick huts, as the earliest layers suggest? Or was it something more? As archaeologists dug deeper and deeper into that central, rebuilt upon rebuilt temple, they found that the city's cult was obsessed with one thing: fish. In the deepest, oldest layers, they found vast quantities of fish bones, piled up as if in offering. This aligns perfectly with Sumerian myth, which states, as we've noted, that Eridu was the home of Enki. The myths tell of strange, semi-divine beings who came from the sea to teach humanity the arts of civilization. One text describes the Apkallu 7 sages who are sent by Enki before the flood to give culture, science, and order to mankind. They were often described as being adorned with the bodies of fish, or as being part fish, part man. Is it possible that Alulim and Alalgar were remembered as these Apkallu, these primordial, civilizing teachers who came from the water? Let us, for a moment, entertain the most fringe interpretation. What if Eridu was more than just the first city? What if it was Earth Base 1, a colonial outpost, a landing zone, established by the Anunnaki? Its location, on the edge of the Persian Gulf in the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, would have been ideal. It provided access to water, resources, and a location from which to observe and begin their experiment. The impossibly long, stable reigns of its first 2 kings would then represent the initial, quiet period of this off-world project, a time of direct oversight before the operation expanded. In this view, Eridu was the original Eden, not a garden, but a controlled environment. A city-state where the grand experiment of human civilization began under the watchful, ancient eyes of its non-human creators. The story takes its first dramatic turn when the King List states that, after Alalgar's reign, Eridu was abandoned and its kingship was taken to Bad Tibira. The text doesn't imply failure. It reads like a planned, strategic relocation. The headquarters moved, the name of the new capital, Bad Tibira, gives us our first powerful clue. It translates as Wall of the Coppersmiths, or more provocatively, Fortress of the Metal Workers. The entire focus of the antediluvian project was about to change. It was moving from the watery, philosophical realm of Enki and the quiet establishment of civilization to something new, something more industrial, more tangible, more fiery. The age of philosophy and law was ending. The age of the forge was about to begin. When kingship was relocated from the sacred foundational city of Eridu, it wasn't just a change of address. It was a profound change in mission. The project was entering a new phase. The new capital, Bad Tibira, the fortress of the metal workers, signals this shift perfectly. We are moving from the quiet establishment of civilization to a new, fiery era of industry, mining, and transformation. This is the moment where the Anunnaki project, if we dare to call it that, kicks into high gear. The first king to rule from this new industrial hub was named Enmenloana. His reign, according to the Prism, lasted for 43,200 years. Once again, this number is incredibly specific and deeply significant. It is exactly 12 SARs, 12 by 3,600. In Sumerian cosmology, and indeed in so many ancient traditions that followed, the number 12 is the ultimate number of completion and cosmic order. 12 months in a year, 12 houses of the zodiac, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples. Enmanluana's reign symbolized a perfect, complete cycle of celestial and earthly power. But the power being wielded in Bad Tibira was tangible. It was a power that glowed in the heat of furnaces and rang with the sound of hammers. We must understand that to the ancients, metallurgy was not just a craft, it was a form of magic. It was a divine, secret art, to pull dull, lifeless rock from the earth, and then, through the power of fire and secret knowledge, to transform it into gleaming, indestructible, useful metal. This was to imitate the gods themselves. It was the ultimate act of creation, of transmutation. And Bad Tibira, the text implies, was its global center. Under the 43 millennia-long reign of Enmenluana, humanity was not just being governed. It was being taught how to master the physical world. It was being turned into a workforce. This aligns with chilling precision to the core thesis of researchers like the controversial author Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin spent his life arguing, based on his translations of Sumerian texts, that the Anunnaki came to Earth for one primary, practical reason: to mine its precious metals, specifically gold. Gold, he theorized, was needed by them for a technological purpose, perhaps to repair the damaged atmosphere of their home planet, Nibiru. In this scenario, Bad Tibira wasn't just a capital city. It was a massive, planetary-scale industrial refinery. He was the Anunnaki site director, the chief metallurgist, overseeing a vast mining and processing operation that spanned over 43 millennia. After Enmenluana's great, perfect cycle of 12 SARs was complete, the King List tells us that kingship remained in the city of the Forge. The throne passed to a fourth ruler, a king named Ennaingalana. His reign is listed as 28,800 years. That number should sound familiar. It is exactly 8 SARs. It is the precise identical duration as the reign of Ululim, the very first king back in Eridu. This repetition is almost certainly deliberate. It is a powerful signal from the scribes. It suggests that after a long, intense age of industrial development in Enmenluana's 12 SARs, it was time for a new beginning, a new cycle of stability in Mengalana's 8 SARs. While Enmenluana's reign was focused on mastering matter, it's possible that Enmengalana's role was to consolidate this new industrial society. His role was to implement a different, and perhaps more important, kind of technology, social technology. His legacy is tied to one of the most fascinating and mysterious concepts in all of Sumerian thought, the sacred Me, pronounced May. They were often described as a set of divine decrees or universal laws, but they were also sometimes described as physical objects, perhaps tablets or data crystals or some other form of technology. These me held the divine blueprints for every single component of a high civilization. There wasn't just a me for kingship and a me for priesthood. There were hundreds. There was a me for justice, a me for writing, for music, for weaving, for mathematics. There were even me for complex social concepts like truth and deceit and law and war. They were, in modern terms, the divine software for civilization. Sumerian myth tells us that the Eme were originally owned and guarded by the great god Enki in his city of Eridu. The reign of Enmangalana, ruling from the new industrial capital of Bad Tibira, suggests a period where these foundational principles, this divine software, was finally disseminated, installed, and encoded into the very fabric of the expanding human society. The hardware had been built. Now it was time to install the code. He was, in effect, the guardian of these cosmic laws. And Mangalana's long, 28,800-year reign can therefore be seen as that of a warden, an administrator, ensuring that the new, powerful, and potentially chaotic industrial society was balanced and controlled by a divine, preordained order. From that detached, Anunnaki perspective, the Eme could absolutely be interpreted as a literal database. It was an instruction set, a complete operating system for building a functioning, controlled society handed down to a chosen administrator. And what was the goal? To ensure that the burgeoning human workforce remained organized, compliant, and above all, productive. Following these two long, stable reigns, one dedicated to fiery industry, the other to inflexible social order, the story recorded on the prism takes a sharp, unexpected, and deeply human turn. The final king to rule from the fortress of the metal workers was Demused. The list records his reign as lasting 36,000 years, a perfect 10 SARs. But unlike the silent, administrative figures who came before him, Elulim, Alalgar, and Menluana, Demused does not stay on the clay prism. He leaps from it, fully formed, into the very heart of mythology. He is remembered not just as a king, but as Demused the shepherd. More importantly, he is the central tragic figure in one of history's most profound, enduring, and influential stories, the myth of the dying and rising god. The story, told in passionate poems and ritual laments recited by entire populations, is a cosmic tragedy. Demused, in his divine aspect, was the lover of the powerful, ambitious, and frankly terrifying goddess Inanna, the queen of heaven, who would later be known to the Babylonians as Ishtar. Inanna, in a quest for more power, decides to descend into the core, the great below, the underworld, to challenge her sister, the queen of the dead. She is trapped there, stripped of her power, and turned into a corpse. To be released, a substitute must be found, a soul for a soul. Demonic figures, the Gala, are dispatched from the underworld to find this substitute. They hunt through the cities of Sumer, but Inanna prevents them from taking any of her loyal servants. Then they find Demused. They find him not in mourning, not weeping for his lost lover, but dressed in fine robes, sitting on his high throne, living in luxury. In a fit of rage and jealousy, Inanna points her finger. Him, despite his terrified attempts to hide, changing his form with the help of the sun god Utu, Demused is eventually captured. He is dragged down, kicking and screaming, into the land of the dead. His death is not just a personal loss. It is a cosmic catastrophe. As the shepherd king is torn from the world itself is plunged into sorrow and, critically, into infertility. The crops wither, the wombs of animals and humans close, and the planet is gripped by a barren, lifeless heat. Inanna, consumed by a grief she perhaps did not expect, is moved by the world's sorrow and by the laments of Demused's sister. She eventually arranges a pact. Demused can return to the world of the living, but only for half of every year. For the other half, his devoted sister, Geshtinanna, must take his place in the land of the dead. His annual death marked the coming of the dry, scorching, barren summer. His return in the spring, to the wild celebrations of his people, brought back fertility, new life, and the greening of the world. Immused is the archetype. He is the original blueprint from which so many other similar gods were cast. He is Osiris in Egypt, the green-skinned god murdered and resurrected. He is Tammuz in Babylon, for whom the women would weep annually. He is Adonis in Greece, the beautiful youth loved by Aphrodite, gored by a boar and mourned, his blood turning into the anemone flower. He is, in many ways, Mithras in Rome, born from a rock, associated with the bull and a god of salvation. This powerful narrative of a divine or semi-divine figure who dies is mourned, and is then resurrected, whose personal fate is inextricably tied to the salvation and renewal of the entire world, became a foundational pillar of religion across the ancient world. It's a story that has echoed for millennia. We can still hear the powerful resonance of a divine shepherd who sacrifices himself for the world and rises again, a tale first told, in its own way, in the sun-baked plains of Sumer. And this presents us with an incredible, fascinating puzzle. Have you ever considered how a myth is born? How does a king, a name on a pre-flood list who supposedly ruled from an industrial city for 36,000 years, become the subject of such a raw, personal, and profoundly emotional myth? Was Dumuzi a real, unimaginably ancient ruler whose life ended in a tragedy so profound that it was later mythologized, his death becoming the anchor point for a story about the changing seasons? Or was he always a mythological figure? Was he the ancient personification of the agricultural cycle, a story told by the very first farmers, who was later historicized by being inserted into the king list to give this vital religious story a historical pedigree and an ancient lineage? For the Sumerian scribes who wrote the list, there was no contradiction. For them, he was, without question, both. He was a historical, antediluvian king from the age of the forge, and he was the god whose passion, death, and resurrection played out in the sky and the soil every single year. With the end of his long, Tensar reign, the era of Bad Tibir, the city of fire, industry, lore, and now great passion concluded. The king list states, in its usual impassive tone, that kingship would move once more. This time, it was taken to a mysterious, enigmatic city named Larik, a place that, unlike Eridu and the sites associated with Bad Tibira, has never been found. After the fiery, industrial, and emotionally turbulent age of Bad Tibira, the transfer of kingship marks another enigmatic shift in this antediluvian narrative. The new capital, the third capital of the world, was Larik. This city is, for us, a complete mystery. It exists only as a name on the clay prism. Despite more than a century of extensive archaeological surveys and excavations in Iraq, no ruins of Larik have ever been conclusively identified. It has left no pottery, no walls, no tablets. It is a ghost city, a capital of a forgotten kingdom that has left not a single physical trace. This profound lack of evidence has, naturally, led to a great deal of speculation. Was Larik a real city that was so completely and utterly obliterated by the coming flood that not a single speck of it remains? This is certainly possible. Was it a code name for a location whose true nature, and perhaps true location, was meant to be kept secret? Was this new capital not a city for humans at all, but a specialized installation? Perhaps a command center, a scientific outpost, or, as some have suggested, a place of judgment and control. The king list tells us that the sole king to rule from this lost city was N-C-Pad-Z-I-D-N. His reign is recorded as 28,800 years. It is another perfect 8 SARs. It is the exact same duration as the reign of Ululim, the very first king in Eridu, and it is the exact same duration as in Mengalana, the lawgiver king of Bad Tibira. This precise repetition is clearly deliberate. It's a signal from the scribes. This specific number, 8 SARs, seems to represent a specific theme or function. It suggests a reign dedicated to balance, order, and cosmic stability. It was a return to foundational principles, perhaps after the dramatic, chaotic, and emotional era of Dumuzi. While the king list itself is silent on the deeds of this king, later Sumerian texts provide a critical clue. He was a complex and powerful figure, the son of the god Enlil. He was a great warrior, a divine enforcer, the storm god who wielded a talking mace. But he was also the god of farming and of healing. He was the god who, in one myth, defeated a terrible demon, and then used his knowledge to organize the world's mountains and rivers, creating the irrigation systems that made farming possible. He was, in short, a god of duality, a bringer of both destructive floods as a weapon and life-giving, carefully managed irrigation. This duality, this connection to Ninurta, offers a profound insight into what Larak's purpose might have been. If Larak was Ninurta's city, and its king's long reign symbolized balance and order, then its purpose may have been about maintaining the delicate, large-scale balance of the planet's systems. Ensi-Pad-Zid-Ana may have been the king of law and order, not just for human society, but for nature itself. Imagine for a moment the industrial age of Bad Tibira. For over 70,000 years, combining the reigns of Enmangalana and Enmangalana, this operation was, according to the theory, engaged in massive planetary scale mining and metallurgy. What would that do to an ecosystem? From this perspective, a new phase of the project would be required. After 70 millennia of intensive resource extraction and industrial activity, a long period of ecological stabilization and control would be essential. The reign of N-C-Pad-Zid-Ana from his hidden secret capital of Larak could therefore have been that of a divine environmental regulator. His 28,800-year term was not about ruling people. It was about managing the climate, the waters, the agriculture, and the very biosphere that sustained the human population. This was a long, quiet, 30,000-year project of planetary management. And of course, the obscurity of the king and the ghostly, hidden nature of his capital city would have been absolutely essential for such a critical, behind-the-scenes role. It wasn't a capital for humans. It was a control center for the planet. When his long, stabilizing reign concluded, the king list states that kingship moved for a fourth time. It was transferred to the city of Sippar. With the move to Sippar, the story pivots once more, this time from the hidden and ecological to the celestial and the spiritual. And unlike the ghost city of Larak, Sippar is another real historical city. Its ruins have been found, identified, and excavated. This, once again, grounds the antediluvian list in the physical soil of Iraq. Throughout all of ancient Mesopotamian history, Sippar was famous. It was renowned as the primary major center for the worship of the sun god, Utu, later known to the Babylonians as Shamash. Utu was not only the god of the physical sun, the light that blazed in the sky. He was also, and perhaps more importantly, the supreme god of justice and divination. Why? The logic was simple and powerful. The sun, blazing overhead, sees everything that happens on earth during the day. No secret, no crime, no injustice can be hidden from his all-seeing eye. This made him the ultimate judge, the divine arbiter of truth. The king who ruled from this sacred city of the sun was Enmen-Dur-Ana. He is, without question, one of the most intriguing and significant figures in the entire list. He reigned, the prism tells us, for 21,000 years. This number is fascinating in itself. It is not a perfect multiple of 3,600. It's 5.83 SARs, or just under 6. The perfect, rigid, cosmic pattern that defined the first few reigns seems to be breaking down. It's as if time itself is accelerating, becoming slightly more chaotic as we approach the end. But it's not the length of Enmendurena's reign that makes him so famous. It is the story of his destiny. Later Mesopotamian texts, foundational documents of their culture, tell an incredible story about him. They claim that Enmendurana, the righteous king of Sippar, was summoned to heaven by the gods themselves, specifically by Utu, the sun god, and Adad, the storm god. There, the texts say, he was seated on a golden throne. He was initiated into the divine council, and he was taught. He was taught the secrets of the cosmos. He was given the tablets of the gods and taught the divine science of divination, how to observe oil on water, how to read the patterns in smoke, and how to perform hepatoscopy reading the future in the liver of sacrificed animals. After this divine education, he was sent back to earth. He was given a mission to establish the priestly class, the Bar priests, who would be the guardians of this celestial knowledge and pass it down through the generations. If this story sounds familiar, it should. It is a direct, stunning parallel to the much more famous biblical figure of Enoch. Of Enoch, the seventh of the antediluvian patriarchs, the book of Genesis is only this cryptic, tantalizing description. Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. Like Enmendurana, Enoch is a righteous figure from the time before the flood. Like Enmendurana, he is taken up to the heavens. He does not die. He ascends. Extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch expand on this, describing how Enoch was taken into the heavens, shown the secrets of the cosmos, the laws of the stars and sun, and taught divine wisdom, which he then wrote down in books for his children. This story represents the most direct and explicit link between the earthly kings and their heavenly patrons. This is not a metaphor. The deepest secrets of the universe, of science and cosmology, were not discovered by humanity through painstaking trial and error. They were revealed, they were downloaded. For those who lean into the Anunnaki theory, the story of Enmendurana is, of course, a smoking gun. To be taken up to heaven is interpreted not as a spiritual metaphor, but as a physical event. Was Enmendurana taken aboard a spacecraft, a sky chariot of his god Utu? Was he transported to an orbital station, or a divine council, on a mothership, or even perhaps to another planet? Was he educated in advanced sciences, astronomy, mathematics, physics, and probability science? And was he then returned to his people as a prophet king? The secrets he was taught, divination, reading omens, could be seen as simplified, ritualized versions of this advanced technology. How else do you explain probability science or data analysis to a Bronze Age culture? You teach it as a ritual. If this pattern appears, this outcome is likely. You translate advanced science into a form that a pre-technical culture can understand, preserve, and most importantly, practice without corrupting the core data. Enmendurana's reign of 21,000 years in the City of the Sun, then, becomes the long, stable era during which this specific, revealed, celestial knowledge was disseminated. It was the period that laid the groundwork for the priestly and scientific traditions that would define and dominate Mesopotamian civilization for the next 3,000 years. The final chapter of the antediluvian world takes place in the fifth and last capital city. After the celestial revelations at Sippar, kingship was moved to Shuruppak. The king who ruled there, the eighth and final name on the list, was Tutu. His reign is listed as 18,600 years. As the script of the Prism notes, this is the shortest of all the pre-flood reigns. The pattern of perfect, long SARs is now completely broken. This shortening of his reign, as if time itself was unraveling, accelerating towards a final terrible conclusion, is a powerful and dramatic foreshadowing of the end. Like the other kings, the list tells us nothing of his deeds. He is just a name and a number. But his significance is monumental, for he was the last king of the old world. His name is forever linked to the coming cataclysm, not because of what he did, but because of his famous son. While the king list itself doesn't name him, other crucial Mesopotamian texts, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, identify Ubaratutu as the father of Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim is the man who would become the Sumerian Noah. The story, as told in those other texts, is eerily, powerfully familiar. The gods, in their council, led by the angry, tempestuous god Enlil, decide to destroy humanity. The texts say they had become too noisy, their clamor disturbing the gods' rest. But the wise god Enki, the god of Eridu, a scientist who, in many myths, had a hand in humanity's very creation, had a conflict of interest. So in secret, he went to the house of his faithful servant, Utnapishtim, in Shuruppak. He spoke, not to the man, but to the reed wall of his hut. Reed hut, wall, wall. Reed hut, listen. Wall, reflect. Man of Shuruppak, son of Ubaratutu, tear down your house and build a boat. Enki gave him precise instructions to build a massive, cube-shaped ark and to load it with his family, with craftsmen of every trade and with the seed of all living things. Ubaratutu's reign, therefore, was the calm before the storm. He was the king who presided over the final years of a civilization that had endured, according to this list, for nearly 250,000 years. He was ruling a world, a society, that was completely unaware it was living on borrowed time. His son, Utnapishtim, would become the sole thread of continuity. He was the man chosen to carry the genetic legacy, the imi, the knowledge of the antediluvian world, through the watery, chaotic abyss and into the new world that would rise from its ashes. With the end of Ubaratutu's rule, the list of impossibly long-lived kings concludes. The age of gods on earth was over. The sky was about to fall. The scribe of the Weld-Blundell prism that inscribes the boundary line. The single sentence that separates one existence from the next. Then the flood swept over. With that one devastatingly simple, brutal sentence, the Sumerian King List closes the book on an entire epic. After meticulously recording 241,200 years of history, after naming 8 kings and 5 capital cities, the scribe uses just 4 words, in English translation, to describe the event that reset the planet. There is no theological explanation for the god's anger. It is presented as a cold, hard, historical fact. A boundary line drawn across time. On one side of that line, an age of godlike kings with geological lifespans. On the other, a drowned world and the dawn of a new, lesser age for humanity. This event, the Great Flood, is not just a Sumerian story. It is arguably humanity's most persistent, most powerful, and most universal myth. It appears, with breathtakingly similar details, in hundreds of cultures all across the globe, from peoples who could have had no possible physical contact with one another. In Mesopotamia, the story is told in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim describes the terrifying deluge, a storm of such violence that the gods themselves cowered like dogs in fear. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah is commanded by God to build an ark to survive the waters that will cover the highest mountains on earth. In ancient Greece, Deucalion, the son of Prometheus, and his wife Pyrrha survive a flood sent by Zeus by floating in a wooden chest for 9 days. In India, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu Vivasvata, who is warned of a coming flood by the god Vishnu in the form of a fish, and builds a great ship to save himself and the 7 sages. The stories echo everywhere, from the Aztec myths of a world destroyed by water to the Hopi traditions of a first world ending in a flood. From the Norse myths of the world, created from the body of a giant drowned in the blood of his father, to the legends of the Aboriginal tribes of Australia. All tell of a primal time when the world was consumed by water, and a handful of chosen people survived, by boat, to repopulate the earth. For a long time, historians and folklorists dismissed this. They called it a simple flood myth, a common story for early civilizations who all lived by great rivers, the Tigris, The Euphrates, the Nile, the Indus, and naturally feared their destructive power. But the sheer global ubiquity of the tale, the uncanny similarity of its core components, a divine warning, a chosen family, a boat, the saving of animals, the landing on a mountain, suggests something far more profound. Could this be a shared, species-wide memory? A memory of a real planet-altering cataclysm, passed down in oral tradition for thousands of years before it was ever written down? The geological record provides a startling and unsettling answer. Yes. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, a strange period known as the Younger Dryas began. The Earth, which had been gradually warming, was suddenly and violently plunged back into near glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. The cause of this sudden, catastrophic climate shift is the subject of intense scientific debate. But one of the leading theories, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, is that one or more fragments of a comet struck or exploded over the North American ice sheet. The immense heat from these impacts would have instantly vaporized a massive amount of ice. But it also would have destabilized the entire ice sheet, leading to a catastrophic meltwater pulse into the world's oceans. The result, playing out over days, months, or years, would have been a rapid nonlinear sea level rise on a global scale. It would have triggered mega tsunamis and catastrophic coastal flooding that would have quite literally wiped out any civilization living near the shore, which, of course, is where the first civilizations would almost certainly have been. This hypothesis provides a terrifyingly plausible scientific basis for the universal myth of a worldwide flood. At excavations in southern Iraq, at the site of Shurpa Kubara Tutu's final capital, archaeologists, including the famed Sir Leonard Woolley, uncovered a thick, uniform layer of river silt, nearly 10 feet deep in some places. This flood layer dates to around 2900 BCE. It cleanly separates the earlier strata of the city from the later ones. The city was, clearly, hit by a devastating regional flood that interrupted its history. It is highly likely that the memory of this real historical flood, and others like it, became the hook upon which the older, deeper, and more terrifying global memory of the Younger Dryas cataclysm was hung. The two events merged in cultural memory to create the single, epic, world-ending flood myth we know today. The Sumerian King List, however, treats the flood as something more than just a natural disaster. It is a fundamental turning point in the very nature of reality. Before the flood, kings were, for all intents and purposes, immortal, with reigns lasting for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, as we shall see, they became ... human. The lifespans recorded on the prism contract dramatically, from 28,800 years to mere centuries, and then, very quickly, to the familiar fleeting lifespans of today. It is as if the floodwaters washed away not just cities and mountains, but a specific kind of biological, spiritual, or divine longevity. The Bible, written millennia later, mirrors this exact idea. Before the flood, the patriarchs, like Methuselah and Adam, lived for nearly a millennium. After the flood, God explicitly shortens the human lifespan, declaring in Genesis 6:3, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. Both traditions, separated by time and space, recorded deliberate, divine nerfing of humanity in the flood's aftermath. From the perspective of the Anunnaki theory, the flood takes on an even more sinister and deliberate character. Was it an accident of nature that the gods simply allowed to happen? Or was it a tool, a controlled demolition? Some theorists have proposed that the Anunnaki themselves triggered the cataclysm, perhaps by using advanced technology to deliberately destabilize the Antarctic or Greenland ice sheets as a way to wipe the slate clean. In this dark version of the story, humanity had become unruly, too numerous, or perhaps the hybridization experiment had produced undesirable or too successful results. The flood was a reset button, a way to eliminate the majority of the population and start over with a more manageable, more compliant group of survivors. The story of Enki secretly warning Utnapishtim then becomes a profound act of rebellion. It is the story of a compassionate scientist saving his creation from his more ruthless colleagues, an act of corporate espionage against the divine board of directors. This interpretation paints the flood not as an act of God, but as an act of industrial-scale genocide. The survivors, like Utnapishtim and Noah, were not just lucky. They were chosen. They were the curated genetic stock, selected to rebuild the world. And perhaps, as the sudden shortening of lifespan suggests, they were rebuilt with new, built-in limitations to ensure that humanity would never again grow powerful enough to challenge its creators. Regardless of its cause, be it myth, comet, or a deliberate act of the gods, the flood serves as the great filter of human history. It is the wall that separates myth from verifiable records, gods from men, and an age of impossible geological longevity from our own fleeting, mortal existence. It is the deep, foundational scar on our collective psyche, a memory of a time when the world we knew was completely and utterly erased. When the waters of the great flood receded, they left behind a world scoured clean, a blank slate upon which a new, fractured history would be written. The age of godlike kings was over, but the memory of that age, the story of impossible longevity, of divine rulers, and of the cataclysm that ended their world, would prove to be indestructible. It is arguably humanity's most persistent and universal narrative, an echo that appears, with stunningly similar details, in the foundational texts of other major civilizations. The most striking and well-known parallel is found in the early chapters of the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. The Bible's list of the antediluvian patriarchs, from Adam to Noah, reads like a direct, albeit condensed, echo of the Sumerian King List. Adam is said to have lived 930 years. His son Seth lived 912 years. His grandson Enos lived 905 years. The list continues for 10 generations, culminating in the most famous long-lived figure of all, Methuselah, who reached the age of 969. While these lifespans are counted in centuries rather than the Sumerian millennia, the underlying principle is identical. Before the flood, humans lived for extraordinarily long periods of time. The Bible even has its own parallel to the Sumerian king, En-men-dur-ana, the figure of Enoch, a righteous man who walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. Like his Sumerian counterpart, Enoch did not die. He ascended to the heavens and was taught divine secrets. Then, just as in the Sumerian record, the flood comes, acting as the great dividing line. And after Noah and the ark, lifespans begin a steady, dramatic, and explicit decline. The post-flood patriarchs like Abraham live for 175 years. Moses lives for 120. By the time of King David, the psalmist declares the human lifespan to be a mere 70 or 80 years. The narrative arc is precisely the same as the King List, a lost golden age of longevity, a watery cataclysm, and a new, diminished world. For centuries, scholars explained this away with a simple theory. The Hebrew authors, during their exile in Babylon in the 6th century BCE, were exposed to these powerful Mesopotamian myths and simply borrowed and adapted them. But the similarities may run far deeper than mere literary theft. What if both the Sumerian and Hebrew texts are drawing from a common, much older source? A shared ancestral tradition about the true nature of the world before the flood, passed down by different branches of survivors. The echo doesn't stop in the Middle East. The historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, compiled a comprehensive history of his country's dynasties. Like the Sumerian King List, his work does not begin with the first mortal pharaoh Menes. It begins with a lost, primordial age. Manetho lists a series of divine beings gods, and then demigods, who ruled Egypt for a period totaling thousands of years before the first human dynasty. The famous Turin King Papyrus, a badly damaged document from the reign of Ramesses II, confirms this exact tradition. Though fragmented, its list of rulers begins not with men, but with dynasties of gods who reigned for vast mythological spans of time. Once again, we see the same fundamental pattern, a deeply held belief in a real, historical epoch when divine or semi-divine beings ruled the land for periods far exceeding human lifespans, an age that preceded all of recorded history. The pattern repeats with an almost monotonous regularity across the entire globe. In ancient India, Hindu cosmology describes a vast cycle of 4 great yugas or ages. The first and most perfect age, the Satya Yuga, was a golden era. In this age, humans were said to be gigantic, powerful, virtuous, and according to the texts, lived for 100,000 years. As each successive yuga unfolds, humanity's lifespan, virtue, and physical stature decline, leading to our current degraded age, the Kali Yuga. In China, ancient legends speak of a series of sage kings and divine emperors who ruled in the dawn of time, bringing the gifts of civilization, writing, agriculture, medicine, and living for hundreds of years. The legendary Yellow Emperor, for example, was said to have reigned for a full century, a godlike span for the time. What are we to make of this global consensus? Is it simply, as many historians would argue, a universal human tendency to romanticize the past? To invent a golden age of giants and gods as a way to cope with the hardships of the present? Or is it something more profound? Is it a genuine, deeply ingrained memory? Is it a piece of actual historical data that has been preserved, like a fossil in amber, within the language of myth? If it is a memory, then the Sumerian King List is simply the most detailed, the most specific, and the most bureaucratic version of it that has survived. It suggests that the antediluvian civilization it describes was not a local Mesopotamian phenomenon, but a global one. The kingship that descended from heaven may have been a planetary system of governance, with directors stationed in different regions. The flood, in this context, becomes an event that shattered a connected world. It threw the survivors, the scattered remnants of humanity, into a dark age of isolation. In that isolation, each group preserved the memory of the before times in their own unique way, filtered through their own new languages and cultures. The core elements, however, remained the same: gods, long lives, a cataclysm, and a new, shorter-lived humanity. This theory offers a radical new lens through which to view ancient mythology. Myths are no longer just fanciful stories for children or primitive explanations for nature. They become corrupted data files. They are fragmented historical records of a lost, unified chapter of human history. The gods of the Greeks, the Devas of the Hindus, the Elohim of the Bible, and the Anunnaki of the Sumerians. Could they all be different names for the same group? The same powerful, long-lived beings who governed the planet before the Great Reset? The Sumerian King List, in its dry numerical precision, may be the closest thing we have to the original, uncorrupted master file of that forgotten age. It provides the names, the locations, and the precise timeline that other cultures only remembered in the dreamlike, poetic language of myth. It is the historical backbone upon which the world's great mythologies were built. The Sumerian King List, therefore, presents us with a set of facts that are fundamentally irreconcilable with our modern, consensus understanding of history. The mainstream explanations that the long reigns are merely symbolic, or that the entire pre-flood section is pure, invented myth begin to feel thin and inadequate. They are explanations that dismiss the evidence rather than engage with it. They crumble under the sheer mathematical precision of the reigns, and they fail to account for the uncanny, global parallels in other foundational myths. To truly confront the mystery, we must, at least for a moment, consider theories that take the document at its word, no matter how wild the implications. In the 1970s, a rogue scholar named Zechariah Sitchin, did exactly that. Sitchin was an author and researcher, fluent in Sumerian and other ancient Semitic languages. He proposed a breathtaking, all-encompassing theory that reframed the entire history of the human race. To Sitchin, the King List wasn't a myth. It was, he claimed, a heavily redacted corporate history of an extraterrestrial intervention on planet Earth. As Sitchin read the cuneiform texts, he claimed to find a literal story that all other translators had missed or had willfully ignored as fantasy. The key, he said, was a single misunderstood celestial body. We know the Sumerians had a deep and complex understanding of astronomy, recognizing the sun, the moon, and the planets out to Saturn. But Sitchin claimed their texts spoke of one more, a massive, undiscovered 12th member of our solar system, counting the sun, moon, and the planets known to them, which he called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. According to his translations, Nibiru was not in a stable circular orbit like the other planets. Instead, it moved in a vast, highly elliptical path, a 3,600 Earth-year orbit that brought it through the inner solar system, between Mars and Jupiter, before flinging it back out into the darkness of deep space. That number ... 3,600 years was Sitchin's Rosetta Stone. It was a perfect, stunning match for the Sumerian unit of time known as the Sar, the very unit, as we saw, used to calculate the impossibly long reigns of the antediluvian kings. Suddenly, the numbers on the King List snapped into a new, chilling focus. The reigns of 28,800 years, 8 SARs, or 43,200 years, 12 SARs, were not symbolic counts of Earth years. Sitchin argued they were literal counts of Nibiru's orbital periods. The scribes were using the calendar of the gods, not the calendar of men. A year in the life of a Nibiran king was 3,600 of our own. The beings who ruled before the flood, Sitchin argued, were the inhabitants of Nibiru. They were the Anunnaki, a term he translated literally as those who from heaven to earth came. But why did they come? Sitchin's answer was not for exploration, conquest, or enlightenment. It was for survival. Their scientists determined that the only way to save their world was to suspend fine, microscopic particles of gold in their upper stratosphere, creating a shield to reflect heat and light. The problem was, Nibiru was poor in gold. But there was one planet on their long orbital path that was spectacularly rich in it, Earth. So, around 450,000 years ago, Sitchin claimed, the Anunnaki launched a colonial expedition to Earth. They came not as gods, but as miners. They established their first base in the Mesopotamian basin, a place they called Eden, home of the righteous ones, and began the arduous process of extracting gold, primarily from sources in southern Africa. This theory, Sitchin argued, perfectly explains the narrative shift in the King List from the sacred, administrative city of Eridu, Base Camp 1, to the industrial center of Bad Tibira, the fortress of the metalworkers, or as Sitchin saw it, the primary gold refinery. This leads to Sitchin's most shocking and controversial claim. The rank-and-file Anunnaki, who were performing the back-breaking labor in the mines, eventually mutinied. The work was too hard. Their tour of duty on Earth was too long. The Anunnaki leaders, including two brilliant genetic engineers named Enki and Ninhursag, came up with a solution. They would create a Lulu, a primitive worker, a slave race to do the digging for them. They took the most advanced primate already on the planet, Homo erectus, and upgraded its DNA. They jump-started our evolution, splicing their own Anunnaki genes with those of the native hominid. Through a process Sitchin described as akin to in vitro fertilization, using an Anunnaki surrogate mother, they created the first Homo sapiens. We were, in Sitchin's chilling view, bioengineered to be slaves. The Sumerian King List, in this context, becomes the administrative record of this long-term colonial project. The antediluvian kings, Alulim, Alalgar, and the rest were the Anunnaki commanders in charge of the Earth mission. Their reigns were measured in their home planet's long year. Kingship descending from heaven was the literal memory of their arrival and the establishment of their command structure. And the flood? Sitchin claimed it was a known, recurring, natural disaster caused by the immense gravitational pull of Nibiru as it passed through the inner solar system, which periodically caused the Antarctic ice sheet to slip into the ocean, triggering a global deluge. The Anunnaki leader, Enlil, saw the coming flood as a convenient chance to wipe out their unruly, noisy human creation. But the scientist Enki, who had a fondness for his creation, saw it differently. He secretly arranged for his human son, Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah, to build an ark and survive. After the flood, Sitchin claimed most of the Anunnaki left Earth, their gold mining mission perhaps complete or interrupted. They left humanity to govern itself, under the guidance of a new, shorter-lived series of kings. Kings who were descended from Anunnaki human hybrid bloodlines. This, he said, is why Gilgamesh was described as 2/3 God, 1/3 man. To mainstream academia, Sitchin's entire body of work is, of course, pseudo-history. It is apocrypha, built on forced translations, logical leaps, and wild speculation. Astronomers have found no verifiable, peer-reviewed evidence of a planet like Nibiru. But to his millions of followers, Sitchin is the man who cracked the code. His theory, whether right or wrong, is undeniably powerful because of its breathtaking scope. It takes all the disconnected, baffling pieces, the impossible numbers on the king list, the sudden explosion of Sumerian civilization, the global flood myth, the biblical stories of Genesis, the concept of gods who walk the earth and take human wives, and it snaps them all together into a single, coherent, and magnificent picture. It transforms ancient myth into a misunderstood history of advanced technology, genetic engineering, and cosmic politics. It tells us that the gods were real. They were extraterrestrial, and their legacy is written not just on 4,000-year-old clay tablets, but in our very DNA. If the Sumerian King List is not a myth, but a memory, whether of long-lived divine kings or extraterrestrial governors, then its legacy shouldn't just be confined to ancient clay. A project of such immense scale, spanning 250,000 years, and culminating perhaps in the genetic engineering of our very species, would have left traces. These traces might not be obvious monuments or technologies. They could be subtler, more intimate, hidden in the very fabric of our biology, our societies, and our deepest held beliefs. The most provocative and personal of these potential legacies is the idea that the divinity of the antediluvian kings was not a metaphor, but a biological reality that may still flow, diluted, in our own veins. Consider the persistent, cross-cultural concept of royal blood. For millennia, ruling families around the world have justified their power not just through divine right, but through a claim of special lineage. They insisted, often to the point of obsessive inbreeding, that they were genealogically different from the common populace. The pharaohs of Egypt, the emperors of Japan, and the royal houses of Europe all claimed descent from gods. The term blue blood for aristocracy is often dismissed as a simple reference to the pale skin of European nobles, which made their veins appear bluer. But some alternative researchers propose a much older, more literal origin. They point to ancient Mesopotamian and even Vedic texts that describe the blood of the gods as being a different color. This is linked to the fringe idea that their blood was not iron-based like ours, which turns red when oxygenated, but copper-based. Copper-based blood, which is found in some terrestrial creatures like the horseshoe crab, is, in fact, blue or bluish-green when oxygenated. Could the myth of blue blood be a faint, distorted memory of a time when our rulers were literally biologically different, carrying the genetic heritage of the Anunnaki? This leads us to strange anomalies in modern human genetics. One of the most famous is the Rh-negative blood type. Roughly 15% of the world's population lacks the rhesus factor, a protein found in the red blood cells of the other 85%. The strange part is that the Rh-negative factor appears to be a random mutation with no clear evolutionary advantage. In fact, it can cause significant immune complications during pregnancy if an Rh-negative mother carries an Rh-positive child. Her body may treat the fetus as a foreign invader. Some fringe theories propose that this isn't a mutation at all, but a genetic marker, a scar left over from an ancient non-human lineage. Proponents of this idea point to the fact that the highest concentration of Rh-negative blood is found among the Basque people of Spain and France, a population with a unique non-Indo-European language and a distinct genetic profile whose origins are a mystery. Could they be the descendants of a purer, less adulterated human Anunnaki bloodline? While this is firmly, and I must stress firmly, in the realm of speculation, it highlights how the King List's story of divine or alien rulers forces us to look at our own biology with fresh and perhaps unsettling eyes. Beyond our blood, the legacy may be imprinted on our very society. The King List states that kingship was the first institution, the foundational gift. This top-down structure of a single, powerful ruler and a hierarchical society built beneath them became the default model for nearly every human civilization for the next 5,000 years. Have you ever wondered, was this the most natural or efficient way for humans to organize? Or was it simply the system we were given ... the only one we knew? Perhaps our millennia-long history of monarchies, empires, and dictatorships is a direct inheritance of the Anunnaki command structure. Modern conspiracy theories take this idea a step further, suggesting that the Anunnaki never truly left. They simply transitioned from overt to covert rule. These theories propose that a network of elite bloodline families, the hybrid descendants of the original Anunnaki rulers, have been secretly controlling world events for centuries through their influence over governments, finance, and media. From the shadows, they continue to manage their human resources, steering our development according to their own long-term agenda. In this dark and compelling narrative, the presidents, prime ministers, and CEOs of today are merely the public face of a power structure that was put in place in Eridu 241,200 years ago. The King List describes an age when the divine was a physical, ruling presence on earth. The flood severed that direct, tangible connection, leaving humanity with a profound, species-wide sense of abandonment and loss. This ancient trauma be the origin of religion itself? Is our universal species-wide longing for God, for a connection to a higher, unseen power, not a psychological quirk, but a deep ancestral memory? A memory of a time when we were not alone, when our gods walked among us. Are our prayers, our rituals, our great cathedrals, all just a collective, unconscious attempt to reopen the lines of communication that were cut when the gods departed after the flood? In this view, every priest, prophet, and mystic is, perhaps unknowingly, trying to reclaim the legacy of kings like Enmendur-Ana, who literally walked with the gods and brought their secrets back to earth. Our search for enlightenment is, in fact, a search for a lost inheritance. Ultimately, whether we look to our biology, our politics, or our souls, the story of the Sumerian King List forces us to confront a paradigm-shifting possibility. We have forgotten our own origins. We believe we are the masters of our own destiny, the product of a slow, unguided evolution. But that small clay prism in the Ashmolean Museum holds a different story. It tells us we might be an engineered species, living in an inherited system of governance, still haunted by the memory of our long-lived, non-human creators. The legacy of the Anunnaki, if it is real, is not something we can simply observe in a museum. It's inside us, and it is all around us. It is the ghost in our machine. We have journeyed from a dusty clay prism in the Iraqi desert to the edge of the solar system. We are left, at the end, standing before the Sumerian King List, an object that is simultaneously a historical record and an impossible fantasy. It is a document that balances the verifiable historical reality of King Gilgamesh with the incomprehensible 28,800-year reign of King Ululim. After analyzing the text, the context, the echoes in global myth, and the radical theories it has inspired, we must confront the final, unavoidable question: what is this thing? There are only a series of profound and unsettling possibilities. Possibility 1, the conventional. This is the explanation accepted by mainstream history. It was likely compiled around 2100 BCE by a Sumerian king who wanted to legitimize his own rule by creating a single, unbroken line of royal succession stretching back to the beginning of time. The antediluvian kings and their impossibly long reigns are not meant to be taken literally. They are mythological archetypes, symbols of a divine order that the current king claims to inherit. The numbers are not years, but symbolic figures, representing cosmic power and completeness based on their sophisticated base 60 mathematical system. The flood is a literary device, a mythological reset that separates the fuzzy, sacred past from the more concrete, political present. This explanation is neat, rational, and requires no challenge to our existing model of history. But it is also deeply unsatisfying. It fails to adequately explain why the numbers are so mathematically precise, why the list transitions so seamlessly from myth to history, with no change in tone, and most importantly, why this same narrative pattern appears in so many other unconnected cultures. Possibility 2, the misunderstood history. In this view, the King List records real events and real rulers, but the scribes and we, in turn, have misinterpreted the data. Perhaps the kings before the flood were not individuals, but dynasties. The name Ululim might not refer to a single man, but to a long-lasting ruling house or clan that held power for 28,800 years. This would explain the longevity, but it struggles to account for the personal, mythological nature of figures, like the shepherd god, Dumuzi. Another variation of this theory is that the years are not years as we know them. Some have suggested they were months or seasons or some other, smaller unit of time. But when you apply this reductive math, the reigns become too short to be meaningful, and it breaks the elegant, deliberate, and clearly intentional pattern of the Sar, the 3,600-year cycle. Possibility 3, the radical. This is the idea championed by Sitchin and others. This is the possibility that the King List should be taken literally. It is an accurate, if brief, historical record of a time when Earth was under the direct governance of a technologically and biologically superior, non-human species, the Anunnaki. Their lifespans, measured in thousands of our years, were normal for them. The kingship that descended from heaven was their colonial administration. The creation of humanity was their solution to a labor shortage. The flood was a planetary-scale event, either natural or engineered, that marked a major turning point in their project. In this view, the prism is perhaps the single most important artifact ever discovered, a direct, written account of paleo-contact. It tells us that we are not alone, and that we have never been alone. Our civilization, our biology, our religions, all are the product of an extraterrestrial legacy. This theory is magnificent in its scope, and it explains almost all of the anomalies. But it rests on translations and astronomical claims that have not been verified by mainstream science. It requires a leap of faith. Ultimately, the Sumerian King List functions as a kind of cosmic Rorschach test. What you see in its tiny, cuneiform wedges reflects your own beliefs about the nature of our past and the limits of possibility. Do you see a clever piece of royal propaganda? A garbled but genuine memory of ancient human dynasties? Or a factual administrative record of our alien creators? The prism itself remains silent, offering no final answer. It simply presents its data and challenges us to make sense of it. Perhaps the true legacy of the Anunnaki and their 241,200-year reign is not a secret bloodline or a hidden history, but a question. A question that has been baked into a piece of clay for 4,000 years. The question is this: are you certain, absolutely certain, that you know the whole story? It dares us to admit the possibility that our modern scientific understanding of the past is incomplete. It whispers that there were ages before our age, worlds before our world, and that the line between God and man, between myth and history, is far blurrier and far more wondrous than we are comfortable admitting. The 8 kings Alulim, Alauder, Enmanluana, Enmangalana, Damuzid, and Sepad-Zid-Anna, and Mandurana, and Ubara Tutumai be gone. But their story, their impossible, defiant, world-shattering story survives. It survived the flood. It has survived the fall of empires. And it has survived to be read by us today, ... leaving us to wonder, who ... or what ... The Sumerian King List is more than just an ancient artifact. It is a key that unlocks a hidden door in the long hallway of history. Behind that door lies a world that defies our expectations. A world where time moved differently, where kings were more than human, and where our civilization's origins are tied to a gift from the heavens. The clay prism does not offer easy answers. Instead, it leaves us with a profound and unsettling legacy of questions. It forces us to reconsider the very foundations of our history, to ask if the myths we so easily dismissed as fantasy might be the most important historical records we possess. The story it tells of a 241,200-year reign of gods, a world-destroying flood, and the birth of a new age of men is a narrative that has been echoed in our scriptures, our legends, and perhaps, as some theories suggest, even in our DNA. It suggests that we are a species with a forgotten past, living in the shadow of a colossal, world-spanning event that wiped our collective memory clean. Whether you choose to see the Anunnaki as literal extraterrestrial visitors, as symbolic representations of cosmic forces, or as mythological figures from a lost, golden age, their story changes how we see ourselves. It presents the humbling possibility that we were not the original authors of our civilization, but inheritors of a legacy far older and far stranger than we can currently imagine. The prism in the museum is not just a relic of the past. It is a message for the future. A message that reminds us that history is not a closed book, but an ongoing investigation, and that the greatest discoveries may lie not in digging deeper into the earth, but in looking with fresh eyes at the stories we thought we already knew. The mystery of the Sumerian kings endures, a silent, 4,000-year-old challenge to everything we think we know about who we are and where we came from. If you have journeyed this far with us, and this exploration has sparked your curiosity, a gentle like, or perhaps subscribing to the channel, would be a wonderful way to support our work here at Past Treasures. If you have thoughts on where we can improve, or topics you would like us to explore in the future, please do let us know in the comments below. For more journeys like this one, please do feel free to check out our latest videos as well.